As of right now, Halo Infinite has 21 official dev-made maps, which is quite the increase from the 10 it launched with. Some of these are of course developed by another studio and some are made in Forge, but regardless, today we're going to be putting each one of these into a tier list to try and determine which ones are the best and worst Halo Infinite maps. Granted, this list will be entirely based on my own opinion and perspective, which means it's completely and utterly correct in every possible way. Jokes aside, if you do enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new here, as I really do appreciate it and it really does help the channel out. Now without wasting any more of your time, let's jump straight in. So first things first, we're going to get Breaker out of the way, and this is going straight into F tier. Most of you probably already know how I feel about this map already, which is why we're handling it first. I'm not a fan of Breaker. I feel like it does have a lot wrong. A lot of it stems from the overall weapon balancing, having 3 snipers at both bases, one of those bases being much better than the other as the weapons are closer together and overall it provides a lot more cover. There's also a lot of shock weapons, which makes vehicles completely redundant on the map. I mean, I feel like there'd be some pretty easy ways to improve it, which would be just shuffling around some of these weapon spawns. Rather than dynamo grenades spawning at the base, they should probably spawn in the center where the spike grenades spawn. And I actually think the grav lift that is on the heavies version of the map should be there on the default version too, because I do think that does help the gameplay flow just a little bit. I will say Breaker is pretty fun on Stockpile, but that's only because the match ends so quickly if you just have a repulsor. The next map is going to be Live Fire, and I'm going to put Live Fire in S, which I don't think will be that much of a controversial choice. I think Live Fire is the perfect introductory map to Halo Infinite. It showcases a lot of the mechanics and is genuinely just a well-designed multiplayer map. It's the perfect introduction to anyone that's new to the game. It's the perfect map for bot bootcamp, but overall I just think it's a nice and fun map to play on. Having the repulsor spawn somewhere close to a ledge where you can actually utilize that piece of equipment properly, having, you know, the power weapon spawn in the middle and the armor equipment not too far away. Overall, it just makes good use of the level design and the weapon choices in the sandbox, and it's just a really well designed map. I'm going to put Empyrean, aka The Pit, in A tier. It's pretty good. I don't think it's the best map ever. I wasn't the biggest fan of it in Halo 3, but it is a pretty solid map. It did let us use the scrap cannon in matchmaking, which was a lot of fun. It has some fun sandbox choices like, say, the scrap cannon, having fusion coils. Overall, well-designed map. It is a remake of a Halo 3 map, and despite its style having a bit of controversy around it, I do quite like how the map looks. Honestly, wish they'd stuck with the original style they showed off, but regardless, I do think Empyrean is a pretty fun and well-designed and good-looking Forge map. Speaking of Forge maps, we're going to put Solitude in C tier. Solitude is fine. It's a remake of The Pit from Halo 5. I think this is our only other official map remake from 343 and Infinite so far, but visually I just don't think it's very interesting. I thought the very desolate and abandoned style would have suited the map perfectly for Infection, but despite that it isn't present in that game mode or playlist, which I thought was really interesting. I do think the map looks nice visually, but its style just isn't very appealing. I get what they were going for, it's like a complete 180 from the original style of the map. But even then, I just don't know if it translates gameplay-wise super well into Infinite. Plaza was designed for Halo 5, which has a very, very different movement system, so I don't think something like Plaza translates as well as something like The Pit, just because the gameplay is so different. I still think it's a fun map to play on. It's not the worst thing ever, hence the reason it's in C tier and not F, but it could be better in a lot of ways. Next up, we're going to pick Chasm and put that in B tier, which could also be a bit of a controversial one. I think with Chasm, you have to look at it for what it is, and it's a much more casual map. It's designed for casual modes. It works really well for CTF, I think, but only in a casual setting. If you're playing this in any sort of competitive setting, it's awful, and the map does suck for Infection. I will say that now. It is terrible for Infection, although that is a modified version of the map, so I'm not really taking that into account. But I do like Chasm. I think it's cool how they've reused one of the campaign environments to make a pretty fun multiplayer map. Overall, the weapon spawning and the sandbox layout is pretty solid, and it can be fun for certain casual modes. To be fair, now that I'm looking at it, I think Solitude and C tier is a bit unfair, so I'm going to move that up to B. But we are going to put Launch Site in C tier. I had to think which map I was about to mention. Launch Site, again, is fun, but only really for like one specific mode, and I do think that is probably just One Flag. But anyway, I do kind of like Launch Site. I don't think it's terrible. I enjoy playing One Flag on there. In fact, I had quite a bit of fun playing Covert One Flag on there too when that event was out. But I do think launch site is just a very, very specific mode that doesn't work for too many modes. It does feel a bit big for Arena 2 for 4v4 gameplay. I think it would work better for 6v6 or 8v8. And a lot of modes just end up taking way too long. If you're playing Slayer on launch site, it almost always takes the full 10 minutes that's in an arena match, or 12 minutes, however long it is. Every match on there just feels like such a drag because of how spaced out the map is, hence the reason it's in C tier. Next up, we're going to take Cliffhanger and put that in B tier. Again, I think it's a pretty fun one. It's definitely designed for casual modes. It is quite a large arena map, but I don't think it suffers from the same issues as launch site, at least not as badly. Again, not the best for Infection, but I do think Cliffhanger, again, is solid for One Flag and various other modes. It's pretty fun for Slayer. And it's just a pretty well designed and interesting looking map. I love how it looks visually. The sandbox placement, everything is pretty cool. Having the grav lift that will lead you over to the platform on the other side of the map where the sniper rifle spawns. I think it's just pretty well designed. Catalyst is going in A tier. I think this is a solid arena map, one of the best, perfect for CTF, perfect for some other modes too. I actually like that some of the zone-based modes, the zone will spawn up on the bridge in the top middle. I think that creates some very interesting combat scenarios, especially with where the doors are placed. And again, power weapon placement, equipment placement, all really solid. The map looks gorgeous and is well designed from a gameplay perspective too. We're going to grab another BTB one, this one being Oasis, and I think that's also an S tier map. I think as far as infinite BTB maps go, Oasis is easily the best. It has the most as far as vehicle combat goes. I don't know if it actually possesses the most vehicles, but the vehicle placement and the frequency that you see the vehicles definitely makes it a bit more engaging. It's also got some really open areas, so vehicles are actually fun to use. But you don't feel completely helpless if you don't have a vehicle. There's a lot of enclosed areas inside the main complex, which focuses much more on boots on the ground gameplay, where you're not using vehicles at all. And again, power weapon placement, everything from a sandbox perspective is pretty solid. The map looks gorgeous too, which helps, and overall Oasis is just a really fun BTB map. It's probably one of the only ones that I would like to see return in future Halo games. Next up, we're going to take Forest, and I'm going to put Forest also in B tier. Now, this is easily, I think, Infinite's best looking map. Visually, Forest is gorgeous. And to be fair, I haven't played a ton of it on Arena. When I've played Forest, it's almost always been exclusively on Infection, and I don't think it's great for Infection, only because there is one camping spot which is super easy to hide in. In fact, there's a couple which are just really easy to hide in. And it's fun on Arena, don't get me wrong, hence the reason it's in B. It's still, you know, it's there in the middle, but I do feel like there is much better options for Arena. It just has a very bizarre layout, but I still think it's quite fun. I still think overall some of the sandbox positioning and weapon placements and all that sort of stuff is pretty solid overall, and again, the map looks gorgeous, so we're going to stick that in B tier. Next up, we're going to take another BTB map, this one being Deadlock, and that's also going to have to go into F tier. Deadlock just isn't very good. It's not... I don't know if I dislike Deadlock or Breaker more. Honestly, you could really mix and match wherever you want either of them to go. I just think Deadlock suffers from a lot of issues, and it just feels very unbalanced with it's kind of symmetrical, but also not. It's got a really weird layout. The trenches just feel awful to maneuver through. Vehicle combat on there is terrible. It's so narrow. And even when you're on the ground, there's so many rocks about the place that your spawn will just start clambering up a random rock when you don't want them to. And it is painful. There's also the fact that the vehicle drops on there are also just completely random. Sometimes the enemy team will get a Scorpion and you'll end up with a Warthog, which just isn't great, is it? Or the enemy team will get the Scorpion way before you do and you won't get it until like 2 minutes later. It's just so weird. I think the setting is really cool, having this big anti-aircraft cannon that you fight around. But I think it would be a lot better if you could actually go inside of the anti-aircraft cannon, and maybe there could be a sniper rifle or a skewer spawn in there, which I think would really help spice it up a little bit. The map is better on heavies, and in fact, to be fair, it has been improved a little bit now that there is Banshee spawns by default. I think Banshee combat on there can be kind of fun, but overall, not a huge fan of the overall map layout. Next up, we're going to pick Scar, and I'm actually going to put Scar also in B tier. I've enjoyed this one much more than I thought I would. I thought it was going to be like a Breaker 2.0 where vehicle combat felt pointless, and although there is a very minimal amount of vehicles, they still feel useful, they still feel fun to use, and even then, even if you ignore the vehicles, I think the boots on the ground non-vehicle combat is still really enjoyable. I think Scar is actually a pretty fun map to play on. Again, it looks gorgeous, it does some interesting things with its overall design, it has turrets and stuff which I think is fun, it has scrap cannons which is great, and Scar is genuinely a fun map to play on. Next up we're going to take Argyle, and that is also going to go into S tier. I actually think Argyle is such an underrated map, it's really fun to play on. I didn't actually get the chance to play it properly during the winter update at first, I don't think. I would almost never get this map, and of course I think it was broken a little bit when the winter update launched. But having played a bit more on it, and having watched some HCS stuff and watching other people play the map, I actually think it's really fun. CTF on here is great, and it is such an intense and enjoyable map. We'll pick out Detachment next, as that launched alongside Argyle, and I'm going to put that into C tier. Detachment out of the two is the one that I thought I would enjoy more, but honestly it was just a little bit underwhelming. I think it's still a decent map. It's cool that it has the teleporter. I like the little island over at the side where the rocket launcher or skewer, whatever power weapon. I like that. I think that's cool. It does have a fun layout, but I just don't think it's the best in terms of overall gameplay. But Detachment definitely isn't a bad map by any stretch of the imagination. Next up we've got Fragmentation, and I'm going to put that into C tier as well, which is probably going to be the hottest take of the video. It's obviously like a spiritual successor to Valhalla, but I just think it feels too narrow, which again on BTB it makes vehicle combat feel pointless. Vehicles are so hard to navigate, especially some of the flying vehicles and tanks. They are atrocious to drive on this map. Warthogs, Mongooses, Ghosts, and the Chopper to a degree are mostly fine, but some of the bigger vehicles and the flying ones, they're just not fun to use. And again, it's just like for a BTB map to feel this narrow, for it to essentially just be like a few kind of wide corridors, it's just not the best for BTB. It's definitely better than the other two, and again, it looks gorgeous visually, but it's just not the most enjoyable gameplay-wise. As for Aquarius, that's going to go into A tier. I think it's a very sweaty map, but I still think it's a pretty well-designed one. CTF can be super intense, zone-based modes can be really intense, there's a lot of grenades being thrown, but overall, it's a pretty well-designed map. It looks nice, I like the setting, I think the sandbox design, you can't really go wrong with it. The placement of everything is just pretty solid, it's just a fun, well-designed map. Definitely, I'd argue one of the most competitive maps in Infinite, just because of how it's laid out. It's definitely the most competitive, not the most competitive, but one of them. It just has a competitive layout, and I don't really know how to explain it. Speaking of which, so does Streets, but I'm going to put Streets in C tier. I used to absolutely despise this map. Really enjoyed it on Infection, though. I actually think it's a really good Infection map. And again, this is a super sweaty map. It's one of the favorites for a lot of people that play Ranked and a lot of HCS players. I know a lot of people love this map. I'm personally not a huge fan, not a fan of its layout, not a fan of a lot of the sandbox placements. I mean, the rocket launcher spawn in the middle is fine, but as a whole, I'm just not a huge Streets fan, which I know is going to be a bit of a hot take. I just do not like this map very much. And this is also probably going to be another one. I'm going to put Behemoth in A tier. I used to like Behemoth a lot more. I think I just don't play it as much now, but I think, again, you've got to look at it in the same way you look at Chasm. It's designed for casual arena gameplay, hence the reason it has vehicles on there. And Behemoth's layout overall is fine. I just think it is lacking in cover. The power weapon placement, having the 2 snipers or the 2 skewers, you can deal with vehicles pretty easily, but sometimes if the Banshee spawns on the map and you spawn out in the open, it can be a bit painful trying to deal with that specific vehicle, but that also just depends on what vehicles are spawning. Sometimes it's the Ghost, sometimes it's the Chopper. The Chopper is probably the easiest to deal with, although Warthogs and Rocket Hogs also spawn. The Rocket Hog can be a nightmare at times. But I genuinely love the design and the layout of Breaker. Again, some of the weapon placements and sandbox wise, it's fine. It just sucks for Infection. Bazaar, I'm also going to chuck into A tier. A lot of the same things I said about Aquarius apply here. It's a very competitive map, but it is quite a fun one. Its weapon layout and equipment placements are perfect. I don't really have any major flaws. I just don't think it's the most enjoyable map to play on. Recharge is going to go into B tier. I like Recharge. Again, well-designed map. Gives me a lot of nostalgia to the flights. To be fair, so does Bazaar and so does Livefire. Have quite a bit of nostalgia for those. And yeah, Recharge is fun. I think as well, having that sort of nostalgia for when they first showed off some of the screenshots for the multiplayer maps. I think Recharge is cool, and it also gave me my introduction to the grappling hook, I just don't like its layout as much as some of the other ones. I think it's definitely one of the most interesting ones as far as arena maps go. It's got a more interesting layout overall, but I just don't think it's the most enjoyable to play on. And finally, we have High Power, and I'm going to chuck that into S tier. It's the second best BTB map. I think Oasis does take the crown for being the best BTB map, but High Power is easily a close second. Having the native wasp spawns and having a lot of things that can deal with vehicles make it feel balanced. The big pit in the middle of the map is kind of weird. I think I'd prefer a little bit more if that wasn't there, but genuinely has a pretty solid layout. My biggest issue does stem from the random weapon spawns, which is sometimes if you have like CTF and the Ravager spawns at your base instead of the Hydra. Dealing with vehicles can be a nightmare. Sometimes you have to try and find a disruptor or a shock rifle to deal with that wasp that is likely going to be spawn killing. I do wish some parts of it were a bit more enclosed so you could try and avoid some of the spawn killing from something like a wasp. But overall, High Power is a super fun map, so I think it does deserve that S spot rank. Again, just looking at the BTB maps in their own separate thing, you've got to look at them as BTB maps and arena maps as arena maps rather than comparing the two. But yeah, this is my list. I know there's going to be a few on here that a lot of people disagree with. Like I said, I know a lot of people enjoy streets and a lot of people enjoy fragmentation, but I do think in some regards those maps could be a lot better. But if you do disagree, check out the tier list for yourself. Go over to TeamMaker. You can find the list somewhere. And then if you post it, tag me on Twitter. Let me know your thoughts. Anyway, that's everything for today. Let me know what you all think down in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one.